The truth was that by the summer of 1979, Kate was not only exhausted, but sick of being manipulated by her record company, the press, and everyone who now seemed to think they owned a piece of her. She had always tried to control every aspect of her music, and now she was determined to apply that approach to her business career as well. Hiring Pink Floyd's lawyer, Bernard Sheridan, she set up her own company to control her songs and her affairs, named NovaSIA, and with her family as the board of directors. Bob Mercer at EMI agreed to tear up her original contract, and Sheridan renegotiated new terms, foremost of which was that Kate should retain complete ownership of all her recordings, an almost unheard of demand from a 21-year-old singer with only 2 albums under her belt. Yet Kate won her way. Although she wisely valued control of her work for its own sake, Kate's decision was partly motivated by the desire to correct the public's image of her as an empty vessel, a rubber doll, dressed and manipulated by producers and record company executives. Many still saw her as Dave Gilmour's protégé, whispered that he, or producer Andrew Powell, were behind the sound of her albums, that they were put together by session musicians, that she just did as she was told by EMI, or whichever older male Svengali was assumed to be pulling the strings. All of this was sexist rubbish, of course, but in 1979 it was still extremely unusual for a woman in the music business to be completely in charge of her own career, and it was still widely assumed that they were just pretty faces or voices, there to sing the songs or act out the parts the men demanded of them. Kate Bush was instrumental in beginning to change this perception of women in pop, opening the doors for the likes of Madonna, Björk, PJ Harvey, and so on, to stride through in decades to come.
It's easier because it's something I've experienced before, so I don't have the trauma of going into things that are totally unknown. But on the other hand, I think it's just as hard coming out of such an intense working period, which is very private now, i.e. working in the studio on an album, where maybe we're in the studio constantly for a year, say, and then I come out into the whole world of promotion. And it can be just a bit scary, I guess, a bit daunting coming from such a private existence to such a public one.
After taking the second half of 1979 off to rest and recuperate, meanwhile turning down a potentially lucrative support slot on Fleetwood Mac's latest US tour, Kate moved into Abbey Road Studios for the first half of 1980, intending to co-produce her next album with sound engineer John Kelly, who'd worked alongside Andrew Powell on The Kick Inside and Lionheart. No expense or effort was spared to help her feel relaxed and at ease in the studio, with flowers and houseplants decorating the otherwise austere walls, and family and friends constantly dropping by to help or hang out. But the relaxed atmosphere only allowed Kate to indulge her perfectionist streak even further, working solidly on vocal takes for a week at a time. One of the most striking innovations she brought to the album was her use of the Fairlight sampler, which allowed one to take any sound source and play it back across the musical scale. Standard practice now, but revolutionary at the time. The Fairlight was also prohibitively expensive, so that only a handful of musicians could afford to use one. One of these was Peter Gabriel, and he introduced Kate to the device after she sang backing vocals on his hit song, Games Without Frontiers. The Fairlight became integral to the finished sound of Never Forever, used most memorably on its 2 hit singles, with the sound of breaking glass, a repeated motif on Babushka, and the sound of the bolt on an Enfield rifle being drawn back, providing the rhythm track for Army Dreamers. The first thing one notices on Never Forever is that the twee girl child of Wuthering Heights is now capable of a sensual, throaty roar, leading one to conclude that the adolescent fantasies of Kate's first 2 albums have now given way to real experience. The lusty Babushka, which opens the album, is a tale of a woman writing seductive notes to her husband, purporting to be from another female, in order to test his fidelity. In fact, he responds purely because they remind him of his wife and how she used to be, presumably before she grew so jealous and insecure. Delius is an unearthly sound sculpture in tribute to the famous composer, a unique piece of music which could constitute the template for the Cocteau Twins' entire career. Blow Away is a jazz-tinged tribute to Bill Duffield that also mentions dead rock stars Keith Moon, Sid Vicious, Buddy Holly, Sandy Denny and Mark Bolan, while All We Ever Look For is Freudian psychology in waltz time. And The Swooning Egypt is like Pink Floyd scoring Rudolph Valentino's silent movie classic The Chic. Brassy, sassy, revenge fantasy, The Wedding List, opens side 2, followed by the chugging neo-glam rock of Violin. The Infant Kiss is a gothic tale of a woman who falls in erotic love, against her will, with a baby boy. The brief choral instrumental, or is it wordless a cappella, of Night Stock is followed by the understated waltz of Army Dreamers, a song of mourning for a dead soldier, a romantic who threw his life away because he liked the uniform and had no other options open to him. Finally, the astonishing Breathing tells of a nuclear holocaust from the point of view of an unborn child, an original and moving song that features backing vocals from the legendary English folk rocker and eccentric Roy Harper, whose own album, Unknown Soldier, Kate had recently guested on. Wrapped in a bizarre but striking sleeve, the new album featured, on the front, a Victorian-style painting of Kate in a dress made of clouds, billowing up as hordes of nightmarish creatures swarm flying out of her crotch, and on the back, a photo montage of Kate as a flying nightmarish bat creature herself. Never Forever topped the charts in September 1980, the first album by a British female singer to do so. This was a double triumph, considering that Kate had co-produced and masterminded the whole project herself as well. With Babushka reaching number 5 in June, giving Kate her biggest hit since Wuthering Heights, and Breathing and Army Dreamers also cracking the top 20, it would seem she could do no wrong. This judgment was confirmed by her non-album Christmas single, December Will Be Magic Again, released at the close of 1980. Yet her next project would divide her fans and critics, leading her to virtual disappearance from the music scene for the next 3 years.
Subject matter is it stems from people, either through their expressions in films, books, things that people tell you about, things you witness. Musically, I think that's a much more obscure area, and in a way it's the music that often will suggest the subject matter, so the music is quite often the thing that sparks it all off. And that comes from the air, really.
Given free rein to do exactly as she pleased after the success of Never Forever, Kate was determined to be sole producer on her next record and to explore to the full the possibilities of the recording studio as a musical instrument in a way that had previously been the preserve of such exclusively male musical geniuses as Brian Wilson, the Beatles, Phil Spector and Brian Eno. Having experimented with the Fairlight sampler on Never Forever, now she used it as the foundation of her new songs, writing by overdubbing drum machine and synthesizer tracks, then adding multi-part vocal harmonies, rather than creating songs organically at the piano as she had done in the past. Once again, she was ahead of her time, using recording techniques that would become standard practice within 5 years: electronic sequencing, overdubbing, MIDI technology, and so on. Of course, one of the main appeals of this method was that it enabled her to be in complete control of every aspect of the music. It allowed tracks to be built up gradually through endless experimentation, making the production process an integral part of the songwriting, rather than just the icing on the cake. The Dreaming opens with the edgy, percussive pulse beat of the hit single, Sat in Your Lap, with Kate's voice swooping up and down the scales and raging, appropriately enough, about overturning preconceptions. Sometimes heaven is hell, she sings, as the girlish innocence that was tarnished on Never Forever is now well and truly trounced. And Kate's fully rounded adult voice and persona emerges along with a completely different musical sound, synthetic and artificial, yet dominated by the human voice, with barely a real instrumental sound to be heard. There Goes a Tenor is a wistful tale of a bungled bank job, sung in a Cockney accent, while Pull Out the Pin is a dark story set during the Vietnam War and featuring Dave Gilmour on backing vocals. The strange, haunting, Suspended in Gaffer is simply one of Kate's finest and most unusual songs ever, while the album's title track is chanted in an Australian accent over layers of sample percussion and rhythmic breathing. A subtle protest song dealing with the white man's disregard for Aboriginal rights and the rape of their land for oil, this also features bizarre guest appearances from Rolf Harris on Didgeridoo and novelty act Percy Edwards on bird impressions. It was Kate's only flop single on its release in July 1982, stalling at number 48. Night of the Swallow has the feel of a traditional Irish ballad, while All the Love is an affecting, understated song about loneliness and insecurity. Houdini is a posthumous love song to the great escapologist, and is referred to on the album's cover with Kate as Houdini's girlfriend, ready to pass the key to him from her mouth with a kiss. Finally, Get Out of My House is inspired by the Stephen King novel The Shining, and features a drum sound based on slamming doors as Kate taps into her innermost fear, the invasion of her personal space, on this truly raging, angry and emotional song. The Dreaming is one of those albums you either love or hate. Although it reached number 3 on its release in February 1982, it sold less well than Kate's previous albums. EMI were dismayed by its unfamiliar, uncommercial sound and were unsure how to promote it. Many reviewers at the time described it as overproduced, yet it's since grown in critical stature, with many fans holding it dear as her finest album. It's certainly the album where she took full control of her sound for the first time, and marks a radical break from her previous work. It marks the beginning of the second phase in her career that would reach full fruition on The Hounds of Love 3 years later, by which time the rest of the world had begun to catch up with her. In a very modern way, this is an almost psychedelic record, disorientating in its use of cut-ups, layering and disjointed rhythms. Its impact would be felt for many years to come.
Very much inspired by a book. It's quite an extraordinary book. It's very sad and moving, and it's written by the man, his name's Peter Reich, about when he was a child. It was the relationship between himself as a child and his father. Peter Reich's father was a very respected psychoanalyst who did a lot of work. And one thing that's mentioned in the book that's quite aside from his theoretical work was that he had a machine that could make it rain. And the two of them would go out together and make it rain.
The 3-year gap between The Dreaming and Kate's next album, 1985's The Hounds of Love, was hardly caused by any kind of artistic insecurity or a loss of confidence in the face of criticism and misunderstanding. Quite the opposite, in fact. Kate spent a year overseeing the building of her own state-of-the-art recording studio in one of the outbuildings behind her parents' house, and then moved straight in there for the next 18 months. The result was her biggest album, both critically and commercially. The Hounds of Love opened with its breathtaking lead single, Running Up That Hill. Built on a rolling tribal drum pattern and atmospheric synths, Running Up That Hill was originally titled Deal with God, until EMI pointed out that 20 countries, including America, wouldn't play a song with God in the title on the radio.